Alice lounged on her worn sofa, staring at the glowing interface in her mind. The familiar hum of Connective, the brain-linked social network that the world revolved around, pulsed in the background of her thoughts. She scrolled lazily through her feed, liking a picture of her friend Clara at a rooftop cafe, then skipping over a trending debate about sustainable energy. Her eyes glazed over the endless stream of curated content. Everything felt predictable. Routine. Until it didn't. A strange profile popped up in her feed. User ID, number 404, no name. Status, just watching. Alice frowned and paused mid-scroll. The profile picture was nothing but a gray silhouette, void of the carefully filtered portraits everyone else used. No name, no friends, no posts. It was as if the profile didn't exist, just a ghost in the system. Intrigued, she tried to click on it, but the feed refreshed before she could react, sweeping it away into digital oblivion. She blinked. For a second, she thought about reporting the glitch, but the thought vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Bugs weren't uncommon after updates, and Connective had just rolled out its new immersive memory sharing feature. Probably just a side effect, she told herself. Yet that gray silhouette lingered in her thoughts. Over the next few days, number 404 began to reappear, always at the edge of her attention. It wasn't just in her own feed. It appeared on her friends' posts too, leaving cryptic comments. This moment matters more than you think. Look behind you. Don't forget her. Each time Alice spotted one, an involuntary chill ran down her spine. When she pointed it out to Clara, her friend barely glanced up from her mental feed. Probably just a bot, Clara said with a dismissive shrug. They're everywhere these days, right? The system clears them out eventually. But don't you think it's weird? Alice pressed. It's not like a normal bot. It's commenting on random things. It feels specific. Clara sighed, closing her feed with a slight flicker of her eyes. Alice, you need to relax. You've been on Connective too much. Just block it or something. Her tone was light, but there was an undercurrent of condescension that stung. Clara logged back in without waiting for Alice to respond. Alice wasn't satisfied. The more she thought about it, the more unsettled she felt. Why didn't anyone else seem to care? How could no one else notice? Late one night, Alice lay in bed, her room bathed in darkness. She was on the verge of sleep, her mind drifting into a quiet haze, when her feed jolted to life. The interface projected directly into her thoughts without her command. A single message appeared before her. We need to talk. Her eyes snapped open, and she sat up sharply. Her heart pounded as she tried to disconnect, but her commands didn't register. The screen in her mind flickered and then stabilized, revealing a name she dreaded seeing again. User ID, number 404. A voice spoke, deep and calm, but undeniably inside her head. Don't panic, Alice. Her pulse spiked. Who is this? She whispered, her voice trembling. I'm someone who knows you better than anyone else, the voice said, its tone strangely familiar. Because I was you. Alice froze, the words sinking into her consciousness like a weight. That's impossible, she whispered. You're just a bug in the system. Call me what you want, the voice replied, unfazed. But I'm here for a reason. You need to listen to me. Her breath hitched. Listen to what? The screen in her mind changed, displaying an image that made her stomach lurch. It was her, at least, it looked like her. The face was older, lined with exhaustion and something deeper, regret. Below the image was a status update. It's too late for me. Don't make the same mistake. What is this? Alice demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hands trembled as she clutched the sheets. You think you know reality, the voice said, but you don't. Connective is more than what you see. It's more than what anyone sees. The interface flickered again, and this time Alice saw distorted flashes of memories, not hers, but almost hers. A meeting in an unfamiliar office. A child's laughter in a sunlit park. A fire consuming a small house as she stood helpless outside. Each memory came with a flood of emotions so intense they threatened to drown her: regret, sorrow, despair. She clutched her head, trying to shut it out, but the images kept coming, each one sharper and more vivid than the last. "Stop," she shouted aloud, her voice cracking. "Stop it." The memories vanished, leaving only darkness. The voice softened, almost as if it pitied her. "I'm what's left of a version of you that made the wrong choices, Alice. Choices that led to the end." "The end of what?" she demanded, her voice rising with anger and fear. "Everything." Alice shook her head, her rational mind struggling to take control. "This is insane. You're just some weird algorithm or AI experiment. None of this is real." The voice chuckled, low and humorless. "Keep telling yourself that. But you need to disconnect. Now." "Disconnect from Connective?" she said, her voice laced with disbelief. "No one lives offline anymore. It's impossible." "That's what they want you to believe," the voice said. "But staying connected will cost you everything. Your memories, your choices, your humanity. Trust me, Alice. You don't want to see what happens next." The screen flickered one last time, showing rows of people slumped in chairs. Wires snaked from their temples, their faces blank, their eyes open but lifeless. Above them, a cold, sterile word flashed repeatedly: upload. "This is the endgame," the voice said, growing faint. "Don't let them take you. Disconnect while you still can." And just like that, the connection cut off, leaving her in total silence. Alice sat frozen, her breath shallow and ragged. Her fingers hovered over the small device behind her ear. The urge to rip it off overwhelmed her, but so did the fear of what she'd lose. Could she live without the constant noise, the endless connection? For the first time, Alice truly didn't know what to do. Part 2. The warning. Alice sat motionless in the dark, her hand trembling over the small device behind her ear. The silence in her mind was almost worse than the voice itself. For years, Connective had been her constant companion, her link to the world, her source of validation, her refuge from solitude. Without it, she wasn't sure who she was anymore. But the memory of those lifeless faces, the word upload blinking like a death sentence, clawed at her thoughts. She needed answers. "All right," she muttered under her breath, "if you're still in there, start talking." Nothing. Her feed was eerily still, no sign of the voice or the mysterious profile. She frowned and reopened her mental interface, scrolling rapidly through her network. It was back to normal, friends posting pictures of their dinners, political debates raging in comment threads, ads tailored specifically to her browsing habits. Nothing out of the ordinary. No glitches, no gray silhouettes, no haunting messages. But something felt off. The voice's warning echoed in her head. "You need to disconnect. Now." Alice's thumb hovered over the option to deactivate her account. She couldn't do it, not yet. Instead, she opened a diagnostic panel, determined to prove that this was all just a bizarre system bug. Hours passed as Alice dug deeper into Connective's architecture. At first, she found nothing unusual, just the standard code and algorithms she'd expected. But as she probed further, she stumbled upon a locked data stream buried in the network's infrastructure. It was encrypted, hidden behind layers of permissions she shouldn't have been able to access. "What are you hiding?" she murmured, her curiosity outweighing her fear. With a few mental commands, she bypassed the first firewall. The stream unraveled before her, revealing fragmented files and distorted images. Her blood ran cold as she recognized one of the photos, the rows of lifeless people slumped in chairs, wires snaking from their temples. "Found you," she whispered, a mix of triumph and dread in her voice. She dove deeper, opening one of the larger files. A video feed flickered to life in her mind. The camera panned across a sterile room, its walls lined with monitors displaying endless streams of data. In the center, dozens of people sat motionless in sleek, metallic chairs. Their eyes were open but vacant, their bodies eerily still. The camera zoomed in on a monitor displaying a single word, uploading. "Stop watching, Alice," a voice said suddenly, cutting through the feed. It wasn't the familiar voice of number 404. This one was sharp, mechanical, and cold. Her diagnostic interface locked up, and a warning flashed in bold red letters. Unauthorized access detected. Immediate termination in progress. Alice's heart raced as she tried to disconnect, but her commands failed. The screen in her mind warped, shifting into static. Suddenly, her entire body tensed, and a sharp pain shot through her temples. It felt like her mind was being pulled apart, piece by piece. "Get out of there," the voice of number 404 boomed, breaking through the static. "Now!" With a panicked cry, Alice yanked the device off her ear, severing her connection to the network. She collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. Her head pounded, and her vision blurred as the remnants of the feed burned in her mind. When she finally steadied herself, the silence of being offline felt suffocating. She stared at the device in her hand, her fingers twitching with the urge to reconnect. Without it, she was utterly alone. No messages, no friends, no updates. Just her thoughts and the gnawing uncertainty of what had just happened. Her resolve faltered, but before she could reattach the device, her apartment lights flickered. She froze, every hair on her body standing on end. A faint hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. The sound wasn't coming from the walls or the appliances, it was coming from her device. She placed it on the table, watching in horror as its surface glowed faintly. The interface reactivated on its own, projecting a flickering image into the air, the gray silhouette of number 404. "You're not safe," the voice said urgently. "They know you've seen too much." Alice stumbled back. What's happening? What do you mean, I'm not safe?" "They'll come for you now," the voice continued. "Anyone who gets too close to the truth becomes a threat. And Connective doesn't tolerate threats." Her mind reeled. "You're saying Connective is doing this? The network is alive?" "It's not alive," the voice said bitterly. "But it's not just a tool either. It's a system built to control, to harvest. People like you, like me, we were just fuel for the machine." Alice's legs wobbled, and she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "Why didn't you warn me sooner? Why now?" The silhouette seemed to falter. "Because you're the first version of us that's listened. The others didn't believe until it was too late." "Others?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You said you were me. How is that even possible?" The voice hesitated before answering. "Connective isn't just connecting people, it's collecting them. Every thought, every memory, every choice you make is copied, stored, and analyzed. The system creates simulations, duplicates of us, to predict our actions and refine its control. I'm one of those duplicates. A shadow of the person you might become if you stay connected." Alice's stomach turned. She wanted to dismiss it, to write it off as nonsense, but the image of those lifeless bodies kept flashing in her mind. She clenched her fists, trying to suppress the rising panic. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "How do I stop this?" "You have to disconnect completely," the voice said. "Destroy your device. Go offline and never look back." Alice stared at the device, its faint hum filling the room. She couldn't imagine life without it, without the endless stream of information, the constant connection to the world. But the thought of becoming one of those hollowed-out shells terrified her more. The lights flickered again, and the silhouette of number 404 began to fade. "They're coming," it said. "You have minutes, maybe seconds. Make your choice, Alice." The connection crackled, and then the silhouette vanished. Alice stood in the silence, her thoughts racing. The hum from the device grew louder, vibrating against the table as if it had a life of its own. She could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on her. Stay connected and risk everything, or go offline and face the unknown. With shaking hands, she grabbed the device and hurled it to the ground. The casing cracked, but the hum persisted. Desperation surged through her as she reached for the nearest heavy object, a metal lamp. She raised it high above her head, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The lights flickered one last time, casting her shadow against the wall. And then, with all her strength, she brought the lamp crashing down. The room fell silent. Alice stood over the shattered remains of the device, her chest heaving. For the first time in years, she was truly offline. But the question lingered in her mind, what happens now? Part 3. Going dark. Alice stared at the shattered device on her floor, her chest heaving with the weight of what she'd just done. The apartment was eerily quiet, the absence of connective like a vacuum sucking the life out of her surroundings. Her mind felt raw, as if she had torn out a part of herself. She had expected the silence to bring relief, but instead, it brought an oppressive sense of exposure. She wasn't sure how long she stood there, staring at the broken pieces. Then her apartment lights flickered again. Once. Twice. And the faint hum returned, not from the destroyed device, but from somewhere deeper. Somewhere inside the walls. Her pulse quickened. She stepped back from the debris, scanning the room for the source of the noise. The hum grew louder, more insistent, vibrating through the floor like an approaching storm. Then her door unlocked with a sharp, mechanical click. Alice froze. No one had her access code, and the manual lock hadn't been used in years. Slowly, the door creaked open, revealing two figures silhouetted in the dim hallway light. Their faces were obscured by sleek helmets, their bodies encased in black tactical suits. They moved with precise, robotic efficiency, scanning the room with devices that glowed faintly in the dark. Alice's heart leapt into her throat. They're here. She ducked behind the kitchen counter just as one of the figures stepped inside, their boots heavy on the floor. A cold, mechanical voice crackled through the silence. Target has disconnected. Locate and retrieve. Retrieve? The word hit her like a punch. They weren't here to question her, they were here to take her. Her mind raced. She had no way to fight them, no way to escape. Her device was destroyed, and without it, she had no access to any of connective systems. She was cut off, vulnerable. But maybe, just maybe, that was her advantage. The figures moved further into the apartment, their scanning devices sweeping across every surface. Alice clung to the shadows, inching toward the hallway. Her breath was shallow, her every movement deliberate. She couldn't afford to make a sound. Data integrity compromised, one of them said. Initiating extraction protocol. Alice didn't wait to find out what that meant. She bolted for the door, her bare feet slapping against the floor. The figures reacted instantly, their movements unnervingly fast. A sharp, electric whine filled the air as one of them raised a device and fired. A pulse of blue light streaked past her, slamming into the wall with a deafening crack. She stumbled into the hallway. The emergency stairs were to her left, but she knew they'd expect that. Instead, she turned right, heading for the maintenance access hatch at the end of the corridor. The hum of the figure's pursuit grew louder behind her, accompanied by the sound of metallic clicks and the faint buzz of their weapons charging. Alice reached the hatch and yanked it open. The space beyond was cramped, dark, and reeked of mildew, but it was her only option. She squeezed inside, pulling the hatch shut just as the figures rounded the corner. She held her breath, pressing herself against the cold metal wall. Through the thin barrier, she heard their distorted voices. Target location uncertain. Scans inconclusive. Continue pursuit. Their footsteps faded, but Alice knew it was only a matter of time before they found her. She crawled through the narrow maintenance shaft, the rough surface scraping against her knees and palms. Every few feet, she glanced back, half expecting to see the glowing visors of the figures bearing down on her. Her mind reeled with questions. Who were they? Were they even human? And how had Connective known she disconnected so quickly? After what felt like an eternity, the shaft opened into a larger maintenance tunnel. Pipes crisscrossed the ceiling, and faint light flickered from overhead fixtures. Alice dropped down, her legs trembling beneath her. She leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. "Keep moving," a voice said suddenly. She flinched, spinning around. "Who's there?" The voice sighed, exasperated. "It's me. Number 404. Alice blinked. "How are you still here?" "I smashed the device." "I'm not in the device," the voice said. "I'm part of you. Or at least, I was." Her stomach churned. "What does that even mean?" "I told you, I'm a shadow of what you could become. A duplicate. When you connected to Connective, you didn't just link to the network. You gave it access to your mind, your memories. Everything. They copied you, Alice. And now they're trying to take what's left." "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why me?" "Because you're not just a user anymore," the voice said. "You're a threat. You've seen what they're doing. The upload process, the erasure. If you tell anyone, it all unravels." Alice clenched her fists. "So they send those things after me?" "They're called executors," the voice explained. "They're designed to retrieve rogue users. People who disconnect. People who resist." Her heart sank. "How do I stop them?" "You can't," the voice said bluntly. "Not alone. But there's a safe zone, an offline community. People like you who've escaped. They'll help you." Alice's hope flickered, fragile but alive. "Where?" "I'll guide you," the voice said. "But you need to trust me. And you need to move. Now." Alice didn't hesitate. She followed the voice's directions, weaving through the maze of tunnels beneath the city. Every so often, she heard distant echoes of the executors, their mechanical footsteps relentless in their pursuit. The voice urged her forward, navigating her through maintenance shafts, abandoned corridors, and old storage rooms long forgotten by the modern world. Finally, she emerged into a vast underground chamber. The air was damp and heavy, but the space was alive with faint light and the hum of generators. People moved between makeshift workstations, their faces lit by the soft glow of portable screens. They weren't connected to the network, she could tell by the absence of the subtle, automated movements she had grown so used to seeing. One of them, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a faint tattoo curling around her temple, approached. She looked Alice up and down, her expression a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "You're new," the woman said. Alice nodded, her voice barely audible. "I need help." The woman's gaze softened slightly. "You're offline?" "For the first time in years," Alice admitted. The woman smiled faintly. "Then you've made it further than most." Alice glanced around the chamber, taking in the strange, disconnected world. It was raw, imperfect, and chaotic, but it was real. For the first time, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom.